Do you ever wish that you had a resource that would allow you to find thousands of different story ideas, whether that be plot points, characters, settings, etc.? Well, I'm going to be talking about 5 different areas that I think are rich with inspiration. Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppy. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. If it is your first time here, How to Write Good is a writing podcast that seeks to find principles and advice that can be applied across a broad range of writing situations. If you've been here before, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button below, and share. The first area I think you should check when looking for different story ideas is actually other art. This includes all different art forms. It includes paintings, it includes ceramics, it includes music, it includes books. In my other episode about finding an endless supply of story ideas, which you should check out if you haven't already, it's linked either here or below. In that episode, I talked about how when we look at the world, we're trying to zoom in on a specific aspect of the world. We're trying to slow down. We're trying to understand pieces of the world we didn't see before. Art is such a powerful tool for finding ideas because it shortcuts that process. If you're listening to a song, that musician has keyed in on a specific part of reality and they magnified it for you. So for a short amount of time, your mind revolves around the emotion and the ideas of that song. One artist who has done this extremely well is actually Pablo Picasso. Pablo Picasso has this piece, I guess you would call it a single piece, that I point to a lot. It's about, it might be 50 different paintings of bowls. But what Pablo Picasso is doing is he's looking at the bowls and he's presenting them in a different way every single time. Each different painting Pablo Picasso created was a small aspect of the bowl amplified. Each one was a different way to look at the bowl. And this is exactly what the artist does, and this is why it's so useful to look at art when you're looking for ideas. Each artist has a perspective. Each artist has a worldview. Each artist has had specific things happen within their lives, and they can see different things that you can't, except if you're looking at their art. So by looking at their art, you may not see exactly what they see, but you at least get close, and you get a different perspective on the world. The second area I find extremely useful for finding different ideas is history. And though I think it takes more work to find ideas in history, I think history is actually more useful than other art forms. There are at least 2 reasons for this. The first reason is that life is usually stranger than fiction. If you think of an atrocity, if you make one up to put in your book, there's probably one in history that's worse. If you think of a strange character to put in your book or an interesting character, there is someone in history that's stranger. There is someone in history that is more interesting. If you try to put in a character who is extremely intelligent, you will never be able to present that character in a way that actually fits a person of that intelligence. If you think your character is being crude, you've probably never heard of the Battle of Hastings. History has got us all beat when it comes to unique ideas. Let's just say that. The second reason why I think history is so rich with ideas is because we don't often realize it from our own perspective, but there are so many different paradigms people have in history, so many different ways people think, so many different ways people live. I say it quite often, but I think the reason we have art is to understand ourselves better. And we think life has always been this way, or maybe we assume on some basic level that life has always been this way. And if we do assume that, we're missing something about the human experience. And if we miss something about the human experience as artists, we can't present the human experience in a way that's realistic. So looking at our past, looking at how people have thought, looking at how people have lived, looking at the pain and the joy and everything about people throughout history in different cultures, in different regions, and different social classes, if we don't tap into that information, we're missing something. We're not going to be presenting the full of what humans are and what they can be. The third area to look into when coming up with ideas is nature. And when I talk about nature, I don't necessarily mean outside. That's part of nature. Animals are part of nature, plants are part of nature. But when I talk about nature, I'm specifically talking about how the world works. This would include things like mathematics. This would include things like physics. This would include possibilities like faster than light travel, human augmentation, and even man's fight against nature. Similar to history, this also takes some work to find ideas because you actually have to read about science to find the ideas. You might be reading a physics textbook, you might be reading a popular science book. It really doesn't matter as long as you're finding something interesting. One classic example of the use of nature in a story is actually Shakespeare's Tempest. He makes the idea of a storm central to the plot of that play. The fourth area you should look into when you're trying to find different ideas is philosophy. Now, this is one that not everyone is going to have fun with, but I think it's one that can end up being extremely fruitful as well. The reason why I think this is extremely fruitful is because different philosophies allow you to see the world in a different way. If you are able to see the world in a different way, the story you are going to build is going to have a different result in the end. There's also another very important reason why I think philosophy is good to look into when looking for story ideas. Taking different perspectives is an extremely important part of any type of art. Philosophy presents different perspectives, and if you can consider those perspectives, you can look at different details of the world in a different way. Philosophy is kind of like art. When I talked about art, I said that the artist magnified certain aspects of the world, and the philosopher does the same thing. But the intention of the philosopher isn't to try to make people understand the world from a specific perspective. The philosopher, if they're a good philosopher, are trying to get to the heart of what the world actually is. So this is extremely useful because these people have done usually a lot of thinking to understand the basics of what the world is or how the world works. So by looking at philosophy, we're seeing one person's perspective on what they think is at the heart of reality, of what they think are the most basic truths of reality. And besides giving us a lot of ideas to work with, to put into our stories, this can also be extremely useful when looking at different aspects of reality. The final area to look for different story ideas is one people probably don't think of. Some people do this more naturally. Some people will not do this as naturally, but the final area is your own self. If you are someone who does a lot of self-reflection, this is going to be very easy. If you're someone who doesn't do a lot of self-reflection, then it's not going to be as easy. But if you decide to take some time to self-reflect on how you react to things or how you work within the world, you can come up with a lot of different story ideas. If something makes you really mad, you don't have to make a story about the thing that makes you really mad, but you can look at that and you can try to study it and you can see how human anger plays out in the world. And then you can place the idea that you found, you can place this idea of anger in different situations and you can create a simulation in your mind to see how that would play out. And you can use this as an idea for your story. You can do this with any type of emotion. You can do this with your own life. You can do this with different situations. If you are someone who does a lot of daydreaming, you're already doing this in a way, but this is just more intentional. Instead of allowing your mind to drift, you focus, you hone in on one specific aspect of who you are. I find this extremely useful because it not only makes you take an honest look at yourself, but when you're telling a story about that thing, the story comes across in a more intimate way. The person who's reading the story is more connected to what they are reading. Honestly, I think this way of finding different story ideas is probably the hardest, but probably the one that will allow you to find ideas that have the most impact because these ideas are directly related to how you work. You may not be able to see the inner workings of another person, but you can see the inner workings of yourself. You can study yourself to such a great degree that you can see why you think in a specific way. You can see why you come to specific conclusions, and you can see why certain things set off certain emotions within you. This isn't the end of what you can discover by actually looking at your own person. But I just wanted to give you a few examples of what to look for or how to start down that path, because I do think it's the most difficult area to dig into, and it requires a habit of self-reflection. If you enjoyed this, you're probably wondering how you can support me. Well, you can actually do two simple things. Follow the first link below to grab a copy of my book, and then follow the second link and sign up for my newsletter. It's that simple. Those two things will mean the world to me and give me more time to write books and create content for you. As always, my name is Daniel Poppy, and this is How to Write Good.